What are some of the most eerie and unexplained mysteries that you have experienced in your life? One day my mother came and picked me up from kindergarten. We lived in a small town called Sentinel, Oklahoma. When we arrived home, my mom opened the side door which went directly into the kitchen. Once we stepped inside, we both froze. There in the kitchen counter was a butcher knife that had been buried into the counter a good inch, with a note under it. When my mom tore the note away and read it, she turned pale and we noped out of the house real quick. To this day, I'm 41, she won't tell me what it said. Edit. Talked with my mom, she was about to go to bed. But tomorrow she wants to have lunch and she said she will tell me then. Edit 2. I'm not sure how to respond here. I am really surprised at this response. This event has been in the lost and found bin in my mind. Thanks for all the excitement. Final update. Decided to just go over to my mother's this morning on my way to work. This is what she said. When I grabbed the note and opened it, it said, "Please fix the window in your kid's room. I couldn't get it to open last night." She said the words were written in smeared red ink and had a frowny face at the end. She also said that the window above the sink had been open and that's how they got in. No one ever figured out who it was or why. Totally explains why I had moved into my dad's house in Oklahoma City just a few days later. She said that was the last weird thing that happened there. She never told me because first, you don't tell a kid that. Ever. Second, she had just forgotten about it. It happened 35 years ago. So that's my story and the most karma and messages I've ever gotten here. Haha, crazy. About a year ago now, I was sitting at home watching a movie and noticed out onto the backyard patio a man standing there looking straight up in the air. As high as his head would go, almost looking backward. Scared the living shit out of me. Person was as still as a board. He was dressed in very nice clothes though, a royal blue suit with brown shoes, which didn't really fit the scene. I grabbed my cell phone and watched him for a minute to see what he was doing before I'd call the police. Out of nowhere he shook his head, almost out of a trance, and looked around to see where he was. He took his cell phone out and started making a call. At that point I opened the sliding door, with the screen still being shut, and asked if he was okay. He sounded very frantic and said he doesn't know how he got there. I told him where he was and apparently he lived a few streets over. He walked out the side gate after apologizing profusely. I've seen him a few times in passing and he's seemed extremely normal, drives a Porsche Cayenne. No idea WTF that was about. Okay, let me preface this by saying I categorically do not believe in the supernatural of any kind. I'm not religious and consider myself agnostic leaning atheist. I have no clue why this is happening. I've owned the same house for over 23 years. It began almost immediately. My spoons have been disappearing at an alarming rate. At first, I put it off to the kids. But it didn't stop even after they had moved out. I lived alone for many years and they would still vanish. I checked garbage. I've searched corners and every place where they could conceivably be and not be. I once bought 120 metal teaspoons and they were all gone within a year and a half. More than 10 per month. Oddly, the plastic spoons still disappear, but much more slowly. I will count and keep track of them, and that slows it down, but they somehow keep vanishing. My granddaughters now live with me, but it doesn't seem to be a factor. It's worse in the fall for some reason. I estimate I've lost more than 1,000 spoons somewhere in this house and I can't find them. No, I'm not senile or crazy. Others have noticed the spoon thing here. I can't explain it and have stopped trying. I don't care if anyone believes this shit or not, but you asked and I was in the mood to type it out. I just counted. I'm down to 7 spoons, 3 teaspoons and 4 tablespoons. 3 teaspoons missing since I last checked sometime last month. I was 8 years old. I was awakened in the middle of the night needing to go to the bathroom. On my way down the hallway, lights off, I saw faintly the vacuum cleaner lying on the floor, so I stepped over it and went into the bathroom. I turned on the light and shut the door. When I finished and opened the bathroom door, the light shone down the hallway. But there was no vacuum cleaner there, so anyway, ghost vacuum cleaner. There's this pedestrian crossing near my place that I always cross, and for some reason for the past couple of weeks, I'd feel really uneasy whenever I walked across. Then just last Sunday I got hit by a car that failed to stop while I was crossing it. I remember one thing that genuinely freaked me out when I was 12. I had awoken and gone to the kitchen to fix myself some breakfast. When I got there, I heard my dad snoring coming from the couch in the living room. I thought it was strange for him to be sleeping since it was 10 hours and he typically woke up early. But maybe he is taking a nap. As I'm walking towards there, the snoring keeps on getting louder and louder to the point it sounds exaggerated. Just as I pop my head over the couch to say hi, the sound just stops. Nobody is on the couch. I call out to my family and nobody answers. They had gone out to get lunch. I still can't explain it to this day. I'm not the kind of person to have a great many friends, but those friends I do keep are sacred to me. So one evening I was getting out of a Rotterdam subway, black, to go to my apartment near there, when I see an old friend, one I haven't seen in the flesh in a few years, heading into the subway. I call out his name, he turns, waves and makes this call me gesture, then the doors close and the subway rides off. 30 seconds later, my phone rings. It was my friend, who told me he'd just seen me get in the normal train he'd used to get home from the bar. Apparently, I had grinned, waved, gestured call me, the door shut and the train drove off. I lived in Rotterdam. He lived in Enschede. That's just over 200 kilometers apart. Or about 125 miles. I usually have these weird premonitions about completely useless and unimportant things. Like the other day I went to get some cereal and before I opened the cabinet I put my hand out because I felt like the box was gonna fall out. Opened the cabinet, box fell into my hand. The weirdest one was when I was down in the living room while my phone was upstairs. I was just casually watching TV when I felt the need to go up and check my phone. Like it was an absolute necessity to get up and go check my phone. I get up and go to my room and the second I open my door, my phone goes off because my friend called me to tell me he took the biggest shit of his life. When I was 15 I lived in a 2-story house. My dog used to sleep with me. One night he was growling so loudly it woke me up. I had my back to my window and opened my eyes to a bright green light against my entire wall, obviously coming from the window. I wanted to turn and look but I swear my body wouldn't let me turn around. I stood up back to the window, called my dog, picked him up and walked in the hallway. I closed the door and looked at the bottom of the door to see the light blasting from underneath it. I didn't tell my parents. I just slept in the hallway holding my dog that whole night. I lived in downstate NY around 2000. A friend and I were having a sleepover watching Disney and crap till 1 a.m. We were the only ones awake and soon went to bed. 5 minutes into nearly falling asleep we hear this sound like a hum that got louder and quieter and louder and quieter. There was a greenish light shining through my window and it glowed brighter and dimmed, back and forth, and it was kinda in sync with the sound. I was terrified. My friend was terrified. I thought it was aliens. Couldn't sleep after that. In the morning I told my mom and sister, and it didn't happen again. I hated that house even more after that. We always had the craziest bugs coming in and a lot of other weird spooky shit happening. And this is something I don't know how to explain. Edit. If anyone has ever heard what the last car, caboose, lol, of the Metro North or LIRR train sounds like, then that's a good example of what I heard. Just more slowed down and muffled. Getting a lot of questions about the sound. I woke up in the middle of the night to a humming sound. When I opened my eyes the room was flooded with bright white light coming from the window. It was as if a helicopter with a high-intensity spotlight was outside my window. It scared the crap out of me. I closed my eyes and threw the blanket over my head for a few seconds, and when I opened them back up it was dark in the room again. I always figured it was a waking dream type thing. But these similar stories makes me wonder if it was something else. Okay, so me, my 12-year-old brother and my dad visit Pakistan to see some relatives. This was my first ever trip to Pakistan as I'm from the UK, and so everything came as a shock to me, but the most chilling thing I have experienced was during this trip. We all go to a family member's house and me and my younger brother decide to go upstairs alone and just explore the house as we had been there for 3 hours and were bored. I think I need to explain that my brother is always joking, never serious for a single second, and this is the only time I have ever seen him show such dread and fear in my life. We go up the stairs and down the hallway where there is a completely pitch dark room which I am currently walking towards, and I look back and see him frozen on the stair steps just staring at the room in horror. Me being confused, I ask what's wrong and he says something coming from a joker like him. Sent chills down my spine. This whole place isn't right. There is so much pain and suffering here. And then he ran back downstairs not saying a single word until we left that house. When I asked him he just kept saying that house is effed. I'm not going back, there's something wrong with that family. 7 years later, I get the full truth after my dad reluctantly told me the story, and this makes everything 1000x worse. The house used to belong to a guy who raped his daughter who had severely disabled triplets, and when this happened, he murdered them all and threw himself in front of a moving train. There is no way my brother could have lied, faked, or even knew about this story, considering neither of us can speak the language, and he still says that his whole body told him to stay away from the upstairs and had terrifying thoughts just looking at the room. He's the type of person, if he was lying, to just admit he was lying 2 minutes later just so he can laugh in your face. So the fact that he was sensed about the history and his reaction is just unexplainable how he knew that. So this story starts out kind of funny. I'm about 5 or 6 years old, sitting on the toilet, lol. My mom is cleaning that day and I hear her start the vacuum downstairs. All of a sudden, the light goes out in the bathroom. I don't think anything of it at first. We've had the power go out before when too many electronics were being used at the same time, so maybe my mom starting the vacuum caused the outage? Plus it's daytime and we have a window in the bathroom so I can still see. All of a sudden I hear a voice coming from the bathtub though, right next to me. It sounded disembodied, kind of angelic, and I can't understand what it's saying. I'm frozen in place with fear and I start screaming for help. That's when my sister comes bursting through the door. She's 10 years older than me and angsty. "What the hell's the matter with you?" The voice disappears. Was I hearing things? Was that the TV maybe? My parents' room was next to the bathroom, so maybe my dad raised the volume on the TV so he could hear it over the vacuum? I took a second to think about all of that before I answered. I thought I heard something. "Well, if you're so scared, why are you in here with the lights off?" Just before leaving and closing the door, my sister flips the light switch back to the on position. The lights come back on. I have an aunt who had lifelong heart problems, and one night her heart decided to stop and she ended up passing away. My family was throwing a party and she had left for the night. She decided to come back and take pictures of all of the family members for her phone book. Keep in mind this was when camera phones were a new thing, so she wanted a picture for every number in her book. As she was taking one of the photos is when her heart stopped. Her husband, my uncle, a few days after decided to look at her phone and found the last picture she took right when she passed. It was what appeared to be a flash. The flash was shaped like a white dove flying away. She wasn't facing a mirror or anything reflective for said flash to bounce off of. My family thinks that she somehow was able to take a picture of the light right before she passed. I saw the picture over 12 years ago and I still vividly remember it. It was definitely eerie. My grandfather passed away in 2006, but my grandmother was alive and well and still living in the same house they had lived in most of their marriage in 2013 when my daughter was born. The very first time we took my daughter to meet her, of course we took multiple pictures of my grandmother holding her. Some with flash, some without. We noticed, when going through the pictures later, in every single picture, there were what I can only describe as wisps. They were in different areas of each picture, like above my grandmother's head or over a shoulder. We like to think it was my grandfather meeting our daughter with my grandmother. Edit, again, not claiming anything, it was just an observation. Check out the top left. Obviously, for privacy reasons, I've cut out the faces of my grandmother and daughter. This isn't too terrible but gave me chills when I was a kid. We were having a small family friends party at my house and I was maybe around 12 at the time. The adults are in the kitchen drinking and talking while all of the kids were hanging on the couch just taking a break from playing around. Suddenly, the bathroom door started shaking in front of us, like when you try to open the restroom door and don't realize it is locked. It went on for a couple seconds before there was a couple of final hard shakes before it stopped. At this point, all of the kids are looking at the restroom door just kinda freaked out and we are silent. Veiled. Because I was the oldest of the kids, I was the one that got up and tried to open the door. Locked. Maybe a guy had too much to drink and got stuck. I grabbed a toothpick, opened the door and slowly swung it open to reveal an empty restroom with the lights off. I felt my blood freeze and I just closed the door and went back to everyone else. I swore it looked like someone was trying to open the door, but that is pretty much the most unexplainable thing I've seen. Edit, just for reference about the restroom. It is basically in the center of a 2-story house on the first floor, so there is no windows or anything other than a vent we can turn on. So that was why I was very doubtful of a draft. I get I might have exaggerated in my mind as a kid and there might be some logical explanation, but it was still freaky AF for me. My mom had me picking potatoes one day. Hugely arduous task. Filled one basket, went to fill the other and found it filled. It was just me. My sister was feeding animals and my mom and dad were at work. Simple and unexplained, not the first unexplained thing that happened in that house. But it was memorable for me. I used to work in a crisis shelter when I was in my early 20s. We had a small walk-in room with a solid lock on it to store anything that could be misused by the residents, such as medications, cleaning chemicals, kitchen knives, etc. One night the residents had settled in to watch television while I completed some paperwork, and the door to the medication storage room swung open by itself. I thought perhaps it had not caught properly last time I closed it, so I just pulled it shut and thought nothing more of it for the next few minutes. Then it swung open again. I pulled the door shut and this time jiggled the handle several times to make sure it had caught, and got one of the residents to also test it. It was definitely locked solid. A few minutes later, it swung open again. Wanted to nope out of there but was stuck on a 12-hour sleepover shift. After that it never happened again, but the residents spun a huge story about the ghost of someone who OD'd in the medication room, which became part of the shelter folklore. I was napping shortly after my son was born and I dreamt that my husband came in and told me my dad had passed away. I woke up suddenly and just had a bad feeling from it. I tried to shake it off and just laid there for a moment. A few minutes later my husband did come in the room and told me my father had a heart attack and died at work. Worst feeling in the world. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I was in the car with a small child 4 years old. We were on a road never taken in the past, on vacation. It was the little girl of my friend also in the car for context. She obviously didn't know how to read nor any street signalization. Out of the blue, she said, "I feel a lot of suffering and death around here." No prompt to her declaration. A couple of seconds later we were passing in front of an hospital. She made a couple of eerily accurate predictions like that. Not too obvious either, but still. And then she grew older and she stopped. Once we were fishing off the west coast of British Columbia, Canada. We stopped to jig for halibut. The depth sounder said something like 100 feet deep. It was an old school depth sounder, so you can't see a picture, just a red light at the 100 feet mark. So we let our jigs down and they stop at about 40 feet down. We had our rods out opposite sides of the boat, so our jigs would have been 20 feet apart at least. We both jigged a bit and trying to feel the bottom when our jig hit it. Usually you can tell if the bottom is sand, or rock. This felt softer than a rock but harder than sand. After a few jigs we couldn't feel it anymore. So we let our jigs go down some more and they both went the other 60 feet down to the bottom. At that point, we noped out of there. What the hell was that under our boat? My dad lived in a very old farmhouse, with his new wife, her 2 children, as well as me and my 2 sisters every second week. This week, me and my youngest sister, around 8 to 10 at the time, were alone upstairs, my dad and his wife sleeping downstairs. Everyone except my youngest sister and me had experienced something paranormal in the house, and often talked about it during dinner. This obviously scares a 10-year-old girl who is already afraid of the dark. So this night, she came into my room and asked if she could sleep next to me. So she got in, and fell asleep right away. Shortly after she'd lay down, I heard a faint clicking noise, similar to the sound when you click a pen, coming from inside the wall, then slowly made its way to the heater right next to my bed. I figured it was the pipes, and thought nothing of it until I heard the clicking noise literally right next to my ear. Still one of the most terrifying things to ever happen. The clicking noise continued in intervals, moving further and further away from my bed, out the hallway, and when it made the way to the end of the hallway, the sound stopped. I did not sleep much that night. My sister didn't hear any of it, and it has probably been some kind of sleep paralysis, but hearing those noises right next to my ear was pretty scary. I used to live in a rural area 4 years ago. That's when this incident took place. I used to go to a school there, and one night, I had to come home late. On my way back, I saw some kid glaring at me with the creepiest eyes I've ever seen. The most unbelievable part of it all was it was a kid. Aren't kids supposed to have the most innocent looking eyes? Oh well. I decided to help him since he seemed lost. This is how our conversation went. Me: "Hey kid, where are your parents?" Kid: "Do you remember me? We've met before." Me: "Have we?" Kid: "Yes." Me: "I don't remember." "Are you sure we have met before?" Kid: Yes, we have. Don't you remember? It was before I died. Me. What is he talking about? I give him a faint smile and took him home without attempting a conversation any further. It was the last time I ever saw him. Having my mother say she was scared of me but not understanding why for the longest time. Then one morning I figured out why and I was terrified as well. But I still can't explain WTF happened nor can I verify if she was able to see what I saw. I was living with her and my older brother in a 2-bedroom apartment while trying to get through school. They each had a room and I slept out in the dining room and shared the master walk-in closet with my mother. I wasn't fond of the living situation and so made a point to just never be home except to sleep and shower. I didn't interact with her much at all and when I did only to ask if she wanted some dinner or if she needed anything from the store. So not being home much, I couldn't for the life of me understand why my mother was so terrified of me. That was until one morning I was in the closet changing clothes to get ready for the day. It was stupid o'clock in the morning. I walked out of the closet and saw a figure standing next to her bed leaning over her. My mother was still asleep. I stood there staring at it too shocked to move because it looked like me. It had my hair, my face, my body. Chills ran through me. After a bit the shock wore off and I noped it out of there. My mother is doing much better and I live on my own now. No incidents since then and she's no longer scared of me. Still can't explain what I was seeing that morning. I'm late to the party, but this story is both freaky and super inexplicable. When I was a kid, like 12 to 13, I was playing with my friends in their backyard. It was a perfect summer day outside, probably around 80 degrees and not a cloud in the sky. This detail is really important. So we're playing and I'm chasing my friend, but I suddenly stop because I notice something strange. I exhale and I realize that I can see my breath, just as you would on a really cold day. I call my friends over and they thought I was smoking or something because of how thick the vapor was. None of them can see their own breath until they are standing right next to me. It was only happening in that one specific spot. We walked around but that was only in that one area that it was visible. All of us ended up just going home because we got pretty freaked out. In my sophomore algebra class, a kid named Brian was drawing with his friends on the whiteboard. We were not friends and we barely talked. He was drawing a dragon and I was on the other side of the room halfway listening. He said instead of fire, I'm going to make him breathe. And in my head I thought it would be cool if he breathed cupcakes and deadass. Brian looked at me and said cupcakes, and we just looked at each other. And he knew. And I knew. It was no coincidence. Moved into an older home in NJ when I was much younger with my family. I was maybe 11 or so at the time. We were getting our stuff moved in and situated one day, furniture and such, when I noticed something very strange. Where my parents had set a trash bin behind the door that leads into the garage, I discovered an outline of a similarly sized child against the wall behind the trash bin they had placed. The outline was shaped as though someone had just traced their kid in a resting position against the wall, but menacing facial features were drawn into it. Demonic-looking eyes, with a very narrow smile bearing sharp teeth. Under these features read Nikki, and that was all inside the outline. They must not have noticed it because it only stood a few feet tall in light pencil. It disturbed me and my younger siblings greatly, and when I showed my parents they laughed and were 100% convinced we were pranking them with this messed up looking illustration in our new house. Unfortunately we weren't. Fast forward 2 years later. My father is doing work upstairs in an attic cubby, moving bins around to make room for more stuff. While doing this he bumps a wooden 2x4 in the structure of the attic and noticed that it was very loose. He tugs on it and is surprised to see it pulls out easily. Behind the 2x4 was a drawing. A familiar small outline of a child with demonic eyes and sharp teeth. This time it bears a crudely drawn dress. Next to it read Nikki. When I was around 12 to 13, I was biking around the neighborhood with some friends. One of them mentioned a house in the neighborhood that was supposed to be haunted, so of course we went to check it out. When we got there it definitely looked like no one was living there. The yard was overgrown and the house looked empty. We talked to another neighbor across the street from the house and he confirmed the family had moved out but no one had moved in, and no one was currently there as he had been doing yard work all day in his front yard and hadn't seen anyone. So we go to check it out. We walked around back and saw more signs it was abandoned. The backyard was empty but you could see where a table had been before, and there was a small waterfall feature with stagnant water in it full of mosquito nymphs. To our surprise, the back door was left unlocked so we walked into the kitchen. The kitchen too was empty, nothing in the cabinets, no chairs or table, just the island. No one was living there, which was why we freaked out when the crying started. Suddenly we could all hear a woman crying to herself. We froze in terror, but apparently someone made a noise, because suddenly the crying cut off with a sharp inhale and the woman asked, "Who's there?" We noped right out of there. Sprinted out of the backyard, through a few neighbors, and didn't stop till we were out of sight of the house. We were all freaked out, but also intrigued. Being young and dumb, we couldn't just end our adventure there. The stories were true. The house seemed haunted. We had to investigate further. So we went back. That house was completely empty. We walked all through it, and even looked upstairs and in the basement. Besides some water damage in the basement, there was nothing of note. Just an empty house. That had cried an hour ago. I don't know what exactly happened that day, but there was something in that house with us when we first went in. We all experienced the exact same thing. Whatever it was, I hope it found peace. Edit, this wasn't a crackhead. We're 15 to 20 miles out of the city with no public transportation or anything that would help them get there. So unless they decided to hike through the woods from the city, unlikely. No cars out front or anything. And a major police presence, cause we were down the street from one of the highest paid NFL players in the league. A family member's house was always known to be haunted when I was a kind. Not in a scary or violent way, just in a kinda creepy/something feels weird way. We had a family gathering there when I was 3 or 4 years old, and I was in the kitchen with my mom and the owner of the house. A fluffy cat walked in and I pointed at it and said, "Aw, kitty." I remember my mom had a weird look on her face and asked me, "What kitty?" And I pointed at it again. The owner of the house laughed and said, "Looks like colorful sponge can see Robbie." I don't remember much else except my mom being really quiet for the rest of the gathering, and clinging onto me until we left. Years later, when the owner passed away, I mentioned the cat to my mom, as well as a few other weird things that happened there, and she said she was freaked out because the cat wasn't really there. The owner told her it was an old spirit that protected the house and only myself and the owner could see it, and the owner had asked my mom to keep an eye on me and let her know if my sight ever progressed into adulthood. I don't think it did. The owner of the house was notorious for claiming to be a psychic and a medium, but I never thought much of it until I heard that. I legit remember seeing that cat and continuing to think of it randomly throughout my life. My father's 2 sisters each lost her husband within a year of each other. Their husbands had been friends, so they ended up buying cemetery plots next to each other. So at the second funeral, we're lowering Uncle B into his grave. Suddenly, I hear a sizzle. I look up, and instead of a graveyard I'm in a backyard, and Uncle B is grilling. Uncle A, who's been dead a year, says to me, "Do you want some lamb?" Before I can answer, I blink again and I'm back in the graveyard. I tell people that's my seeing a ghost story, but I've considered that it was maybe a vision of the other side. This probably isn't that weird, but when I was sitting outside a building, this woman walked up to me and told me she had a dream where she saw me sitting in that same spot wearing the same white t-shirt. It wasn't a creepy encounter or anything, and she thought it was weird too. I've got a couple. When I was about 10 to 12, a neighborhood buddy and I were camping in the woods. In reality, we were a couple acres behind his house in some forest that backed up to a state park, but that was about as close to camping as I was comfortable with. We had one of his family dogs with us, a beautiful and very protective mutt named Abby. She wasn't the type to startle easy. In the middle of the night we started hearing movement in the forest and Abby started growling and sniffing the air, probably a deer we assumed, until we unzipped one of the windows of the tent a bit to look outside and clearly saw a human figure in the moonlight. It seemed to be standing by a tree just watching us. We kinda spooked ourselves and decided to quietly get our shoes on and bolt back to his place and abandon the camp for the night. As soon as we opened the tent, Abby bolted at the figure, who ran off into the night. She eventually made it back by morning. The other one is much shorter, and a bit more strange. I grew up in the South, and a lot of late summer/early fall nights it will cool off and get really super foggy. My maternal grandfather turned his old family farm into a subdivision where I grew up, so he knew the area well. We were always warned about deer when we started driving, because they were all over the place. I was around 17 to 18 and driving home one night in the fog, fast and invincible as teenagers are. My grandpa had died a couple years earlier, and I swear I heard him say, "Turn your brights on," more in my head than anything else. I was startled but did as I was told, and there was a group of deer crossing the road that I never would have seen otherwise. I didn't say anything about it to anyone. The next morning, outside my bedroom door, my mom had put a pack of those deer whistlers that you put on your front bumper to scare deer off. My mom had a dream where my grandpa told her to buy me some. That one still comes up in conversation 15 years later. This isn't eerie, just baffling. I dropped a crochet needle a few years ago in my living room. My living room doesn't have much stuff, and linoleum by the front door. I heard the dark crochet needle hit the linoleum. I searched for almost an hour and I couldn't find it at all. It's been 3 years and the living room has gone through some changes, which required moving the furniture. Still haven't found the bastard. I was sitting on my back porch late one night when I noticed the motion-censored light in my driveway turned on. As I'm looking, a man turns the corner into my yard, stops and stares at me. I couldn't tell who it was, but I wasn't expecting anyone. I open the door and ask if I can help him, and he takes off running the other way. I lock the doors and go check my security cameras on the side of the house. There was no one on camera. When I was 14, my parents were having renovations done to our house. The construction company ran over schedule, so they put us up in a hotel for a few weeks. One night the 5 of us, myself, parents, 2 siblings, went down to the hotel's pool and we stayed until the pool closed, which was 9 p.m. We then went to the elevator and us kids argued as to who got to push the button to the 4th floor, which is where our room was. Next thing we know, the elevator doors opened on the 7th floor and nearly half an hour from the time we entered the elevator had gone by. My family jokingly calls me a witch because weird things always happen around me. Like another Redditor in this thread, I sometimes get weird or useless premonitions, like I know the phone is going to ring, or I know something will fall, or something is going to happen. That being said, I've had a series of coincidences that have made people uncomfortable. Like knowing that the fire truck I randomly saw as a child was on its way to my house. No, I didn't start the fire. Or sending an online voodoo curse to someone and then they got into a horrible skiing accident that same weekend. Or getting mad because my ex planned to ditch our anniversary plans to go to a concert, so I made a comment about how I hope the concert gets cancelled. And then it did because the opening band crashed and one of the members died. Or 2 nights ago, I'm laying in bed with my husband and I say that light is bright and suddenly we hear click and the bedroom light turned off. It's a little alarming. And inconvenient. It never happens when I want it to, and I'm terrified whenever I have a nightmare about a family member. Once when I was 14 years old I was sick with norovirus and curled up in the restroom. I was all alone that day, out of school and my mom was at work. She knew I was sick and was good friends with our doctor and he could always write us a note and give us prescriptions without even coming in, as long as it wasn't for narcotics. So I am sitting there waiting for my mother to bring by some antibiotics on her lunch break. The old firing from both cylinders ordeal, I will spare the details. Anyways, I am in agony when suddenly I hear a very deep voice tell me to get up and get out of the restroom. I immediately felt better and GTFO because, scary voice and adrenaline yo. As soon as I get out of the restroom a bullet comes flying through the window and hits the bottom of our toilet, right where my head would have been. Thank you evil/good demonic Morgan Freeman voice. I like to think it was an audible hallucination because I was so out of it and an awesome coincidence. Still makes me wonder though, my great-grandfather lived in that house and my father described him as a 7-foot mountain of a man with the voice of Satan. Maybe I should thank great-granddad? Who knows? I woke up in the middle of the night and saw 2 alien-like creatures. Very tall, like 7 feet, long limbs, a goofy-shaped head. I wasn't scared, which is surprising. I'm 30 and afraid of the dark. I woke my boyfriend and calmly said, "Do you see those 2 guys standing at the foot of the bed?" "No. There's nothing there." And that was that. For decades I have had disturbing dreams from the viewpoint of the backyard of my grandparents' house. Later in life after they had passed on, my dad bought the place. I never mentioned the bad dreams because it seemed silly, but it was weird to me that this went on for years. 2 weeks ago, my dad went out to that spot in the backyard and killed himself. I worked at a bakery once and had to start very early before dawn. One morning I was working alone and felt someone behind me. My senses were tingling and I knew it was someone but not a person. I was wondering if I should turn around, but my rational side was telling me not to. I turned around and could feel that someone was walking in front of me, and where it laid its footsteps, there was a blender on the counter in front of where it walked to, and it turns on. I stood there for like 30 seconds as my body was in shock before walking over and calmly turning it off. I remember having tunnel vision, like shooting a free throw, as I witnessed the presence walking in front of me. Funny thing is, it was there, but didn't have an opaque form I could describe. My father, when I was a baby, claimed that nearly every night late into the morning he seen a ghost while we lived in my grandma's giant house. This was during the 80s. We lived there for a year. After months of this, the topic came up in front of my grandma. She asked about what he saw. She couldn't believe the description my dad gave her and thought he was lying. She pulled out a photo album and my dad went through it and found my grandma's sister as a young adult who died young. He knew her name, age she died, where she was born, and a lot of other things he claimed she told him throughout her visit with him. My grandma was blown away and began crying because she never told him about her, and there's no way he could have known about her besides her sister telling my father herself. My grandmother would tell the story all the time when we were older and would visit her. My father said after we moved out he never saw her again. When I was 6, my sister, brother, and I visited some relatives in Arizona. They were remodeling and replaced a crystal chandelier. We got one of the pendants and spent hours playing with it until it somehow got lost. We looked all over the house but couldn't find it anywhere. I was looking in one of the bedrooms, got frustrated and sat on the bed. There was a closet directly across from the bed, and as I was sitting there I realized that the pendant was floating in the middle of the closet. It started floating around in figure eights and then dropped. I got up to look in the closet and found it there on the floor. I still have no idea what the hell happened. Okay, so this isn't that scary or anything, but it's the biggest unexplained mystery of my childhood and I'd like an explanation. I was around 10, I think I was 9, but I honestly don't remember, and I was hanging out with my best friend at his house. We were in his parents' computer room and out of nowhere a page starts printing. We looked at it and it's covered in these weird symbols. I would later learn that it was Wingdingsfkant, but at the time we were fully convinced that it was an alien message. This was pre-Wi-Fi, so it would have had to be printed from the computer in the room, and neither of us touched it. I know it's possible that my friend was pranking me, but he never admitted it and we lost touch a few years later. In the summer of 2012 my daughter was 2 years old. I lost 2 great uncles that summer, both unexpectedly for different reasons. On both occasions my daughter specifically acted startled and looked into a corner of the room where nobody was and commented that there was a man in the room. On both occasions she did this before we ever got a phone call, but after the uncle's passing. I was with her for one of these incidents and my mom was with her for the other. I like to think that my great uncles were stopping in to check on us, but who the hell knows? It's an unexplained mystery until we know for sure. I used to be on a search and rescue patrol. We got a very strange call one night. A loud car crash in the middle of a rural area was reported by a nearby resident, but when emergency workers showed up, the victims were nowhere to be found. So we showed up to the scene, and at the end of a very long dirt road there was a 90-degree turn with an embankment. The car was clearly going at a very high speed, missed the 90-degree turn, hit the embankment, flew through the air, and the front of the car hit the ground so hard it gouged out a pretty sizable hole upon impact. The windshield showed 2 shattered impact zones where the passengers' heads hit, covered in blood and hair. There was more blood in and around the car. The scene was gruesome and didn't look like a survivable crash, especially given the mangled condition of the car. We expected to find bodies nearby. Police dogs, firefighters, and now an entire search and rescue party was not able to locate the victims after several hours. As night set in, it began to get more and more eerie. There was this horrible looking car crash but no bodies to be found. Finally, after about 3 hours of searching, there was a 911 call that came in. A report of a bloody dead body found in the bed of a parked pickup truck in a rural home's driveway a couple miles away. Apparently a family was coming home from a vacation, and when they pulled into their driveway, they noticed the body and immediately called 911. So 2 police units dispatched from the search to respond to the call. We all assumed this would be the end of the story. Well, the police showed up to the house and to everyone's surprise no body to be found. Somehow the body had vanished. There was blood, but no sign of anything else. So a second search radius started from that house. We searched practically the whole night. We're called back the next morning and nobody ever found the bodies. We eventually called the search off. To this day I have no idea what happened. I was about 9 or 10. I think. One night, I woke up cause I was hella thirsty. Went to the kitchen, had my water and came back to my bedroom. Thing is, as soon as I walked in, I felt the hairs over the back of my neck rise. I was feeling unwelcome in my own bedroom, so I just ran to my bed and did the old monsters can't see me if the blanket is over me. I waited like that for a few minutes and suddenly, I shit you not, I felt somebody pushing down on my head. 2 times. I got out of bed as fast as I could, the blanket still over my head cause I was afraid to look. Slept in my sister's bedroom that night. To this day, I still don't know if it was actually real or if I imagined it, but I still get the creeps when thinking about it. A local supermarket has a dry cleaning shop inside. I went into the nearly empty parking lot early in the day. It was windy. I was sitting in my car trying to remember my shopping list. A well-dressed black woman parked near me. Got out of her car with a big armload of stuff for dry cleaning. Was having trouble because of the volume. She looked at a shopping cart in the lot, said something, and it rolled toward her upwind. She put her laundry in the cart, saw me as she was locking the car door. She said to me, "You did not see that." Me, "Yes, ma'am." When I was a kid, my parents watched the same local news station on TV every single morning, so I got to know the sound of the reporters' voices after some time. But a lot of times, especially on the weekends, I'd hear the news on, so I'd go downstairs to the living room to see who's up. But the TV wouldn't be on, and no one would be awake. The only noise would be the sound of the water in the fish tank in the dining area. I've fallen for it countless times, because it sounded like their exact voices. I know this isn't the most exciting story, but it was really creepy and I'm not exactly sure what was causing the sound. On top of that, my older sister heard the voices too, so it wasn't just my imagination running wild. If it was her trying to prank me, then she probably would have admitted it by now since it's been several years, but we both still swear by our story. We've lived in other houses before and we've moved houses since then, and we've never had a problem like this. Cold weather survival training. 3 days in the mountains with the occasional below zero temps. 12 students, each 0.5 miles apart. We were given a kind of flare gun in case you hit a oh shit I'm grenade moment, and you were supposed to head to it if you saw one go off. Anyway, I'm in my shelter freezing off and I see a flare go off. My heart sank and I grabbed my gear and rushed there. As I'm getting closer I see 3 more go off at different sites. Now I'm kinda panicking. 1 is bad, 4 is a shit show. I get within 100 feet of the first site and see the other student's shelter. I warn him I'm approaching and walk up to find him fine, fire going and everything. I asked him if he fired a flare or saw the others. He said nothing and shows me his flares, none had been fired. I check him out, looks fine. Still doesn't say anything, which is so weird. Thought he might be in shock, so I stayed a while until he points to the door. I take this as my cue and I just say I'm gonna leave if he's all set, and he nods. I walk back toward my site and get an eerie feeling. The whole way, hairs are standing up. I start getting back into my shelter and there is someone in there. I tweak a little and think it must be another student until he looks up and just stares, expressionless. It took me a second to realize it was me, like looking in a mirror. I have never had a more terrible, scared, I should not be here feeling in my life. I bolted out of the shelter, tripped and fell. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in my shelter to a cadre member asking if I'm okay and if I'm ready to hike out. Think everything that happened was a dream. I get up and get my stuff together. As we are walking to meet up with the others, he asked me why I didn't respond to the flares last night. Terrifying. I had a cousin who was pretty normal and happy the first 8 years of her life. One day out of the blue she started getting really upset if she was ever outside bare the woods. Day or night it didn't matter. Eventually my aunt got her to tell her why. Apparently whenever she'd be near the woods or open area she'd see a huge black wolf just glaring at her, baring teeth. Eventually she said it started coming in her dreams and telling her it was going to kill her family. These were pretty dark things coming from a young kid's mouth. Then she started saying she'd see kids come open her door at night and stare at her. They'd shut the door and leave her in the pitch black until she'd pass put from fear. She said she saw the wolf's eyes glaring at her from the closet. Now I've stayed at my cousin's house because me and her older brother were always hanging out. In her older brother's room there were tiny child-sized handprints on the ceiling above the bed. We assumed it was from my little cousin jumping on the bed and touching the ceiling. even though she wouldn't possibly be able to get that high. We tried painting over them but they'd show through every time. Super creepy. I never felt safe sleeping there anymore. Eventually my aunt got the church involved with my little cousin because she started saying the wolf was everywhere. At family gatherings, in the woods at my grandparents' house, up north at the cabins for our family vacation. The pastor came to their home and blessed the house to cleanse it of anything evil. Then one day it all just stopped. My cousin's in high school now and still scares the peace out of my adult self retelling these stories with new details I never knew. Crazy experience overall, but I'm glad she's better now and nothing ever followed me home. My life was changed completely at the very start of 2016 by an unexplained mystery. I was accused of sending some extremely rude messages to one of my best friends. Big knock in my self-confidence, and I feel like over 2 years later I'm still not over it. I wish I could stop thinking about where they came from and just move on with my life, but I can't help having these dreams about magically finding out who did it and why they framed me, and everything will be okay again. I feel like I'm split in half right now. One half of me is continuing with life, pretending that it doesn't bother me anymore, while the other half is stuck, paused in time on January 1st, 2016, wishing with every last drop of hope I have left that I can go back to then and continue my friendships from where we left off. This will get buried and nobody will care. Whoever framed me will almost certainly take it to their grave now since it's been so long. When I was 8-ish, I had a nightmare that I was abducted by aliens. Woke up from it having completely turned myself around in bed. My feet were on my pillow, and my head at the foot of my bed. My first thought waking up was, they put me back in my bed wrong. I've spent my entire life trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.